Hello everyone, I am the Magic Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander recently spoiled from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, Vadrik Astral Archmage. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support this channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons get a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Vadrik is a 1/2 human wizard for 1 generic, 1 blue, and 1 red. If it's neither day or night, which I guess that means that all Magic games take place either at dawn or dusk by default, then it becomes day as Vadrik enters the battlefield. The reason that matters is because whenever it changes from day to night and vice versa, Vadrik gets a +1/+1 counter on him. And the reason that matters is because Vadrik reduces the cost of instants and sorceries you cast by X generic mana, where X is his power. So all on his own, he's already reducing your instants and sorceries by 1. However, as you undoubtedly saw in this video's thumbnail, we're going to make sure Vadrik is as pumped as he can be. We're taking his power to the moon. So let's start by seeing how to pump Vadrik's power, which not only functions to fuel the massive spells we want to cast, but also smash face with. After all, he just needs to smack someone with 21 combat damage to take them out. First off is Hammer of Nazan, Commander's Plate, Champion's Helm, and Mask of Avacyn. The deck is not running Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, nor Whispersilk Cloak because they don't pump the equipped creature. However, not only do these boost the equipped creature's power, but also grants protective effects like indestructibility, protection from white, black, green, and hexproof respectively. As a bonus, not only does the hammer self-equip when it enters the battlefield, but it does the same for any other equipment entering the battlefield, meaning that we can save on equip cost. Imperial Plate and Hand of Vecna are some epic ways of pumping Vadrik. The deck is blue, so obviously we're going to be drawing into a ton of cards, especially since Vadrik reduces those spells' generic cost by X, so this can chain into some epic plays. Massively reduce the cost of an X draw spell and you get a ton of cards in your hand, thus making Vadrik more powerful with these equipment. Then you can cast another X draw spell for even more cards than that, and it's essentially game over. The only downside to the hand is that it's a temporary pump and you have to wait until your combat step for the trigger, but it still does the job. We can also synergistically ramp too. Sword of the Animus, Sword of Hearth and Home, and Sword of Feast and Famine are for just that. Just like the protective equipment being included because they both pump and protect, these 3 swords pump and ramp. Oh, and the swords of X and Y also provide protection from 2 colors. The first 2 ramp for a basic land each time you attack with the equipped creature, helping bypass the pesky fact that most land-based ramp is green. Although Sword of Hearth and Home can potentially blink a creature, we might not want to if Vadrik is equipped with a ton of equipment. However, if he's enchanted by any detrimental aura, then go for it. Sword of Feast and Famine might not strictly ramp, but it disrupts hands and you untap all of your lands, so it's safe to say it's repeatable mana acceleration. Black Blade Reforged shines really well here with all the potential ramping we can do. Granted, on its own, it's only good if we're not missing a land drop, but if we're drawing a ton of cards, then that's bound to be the case. Also, when combined with Sword of the Animus and Sword of Hearth and Home, things get really out of hand. Along this same vein, I want to present the super secret tech of the deck, Nightmare Lash. This equipment does something similar, but it's only limited to swamps. Now, you might ask yourself, why have it here? The deck can't really run any swamps. And that's where you spring up Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth on your unsuspecting opponents. Urborg has a colorless color identity, so you can run it here. Yes, the Lash does nothing without Urborg, but it's still fun to see your opponent's reactions when you pull it off. And in any case, you are drawing into a ton of cards, trust me. You'll be able to pull this off more often than not. As for things much easier to pull off, Nettlecyst and Runechanter Spike have an easier time pumping Vadrik than Nightmare Lash does. The deck has 29 cards that Nettlecyst cares about, so it's bound to pump Vadrik. The deck has 34 cards that the Pipe cares about, so I'd say these have a good chance of pumping Vadrik. The Pipe also gives him First Strike, which is a nice bonus. Wine of Blood and Iron, a very obscure card that's in only 64 out of 640,406 decks registered on EDHREC, is so absurdly good here. For just 4 mana and not tapping, you essentially double Vadrik's power. So even if you were at a humble 7 power, you just made him 14 power. For 4 more generic mana, you just made him have 28 power for just 8 mana total. This card is ridiculous. 8 generic mana just made you reduce the generic cost of your instants and sorceries by 28. If that weren't enough, he's now at 1 turn clock for commander damage. Such an amazing card, and the only drawback is having to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. But more often than not, it's going to win you the game that turn anyways. Speaking of investing a little bit of mana to go a long way, Colossus Hammer and Eldrazi Conscription are included in the deck. The hammer does cost a whopping 8 mana to equip, but if you have Hammer of the Zon out, it's auto-equipped for free when it enters the battlefield. The Aura, on the other hand, does require paying 8 mana to cast. However, it gives Vadrik plus 10/10, Trample, and Annihilator too. This makes Vadrik way more dangerous as a Voltron commander, especially since you can begin picking off opponents' permanents with the Annihilator, so it also functions as removal. Loxodon Warhammer also gives Trample to Vadrik as well as lifelink and +3/+0. Just imagine swinging into an opponent for over 30 damage with this thing. Not only do you take them out of the game, but you'll also gain a ton of life to help buffer against the remaining 2 opponents gaining up on you. And even then, 3 to cast and then 3 to eventually equip to make Vadrik at least a 4/2. You do have to start pumping him somewhere in order to start getting value from his spell reduction ability, after all. Speaking of, Unleash Fury, Rush of Blood, Blazing Shoal, and Rage and Lunar Frenzy benefit tremendously from an already pumped Vadrik, but also function to get the ball rolling by pumping him up as well. The first 2 are super busted because they can double Vadrik's power for a very small investment in mana. In fact, they're almost certainly going to cost just 1 red mana each to cast. From there, you can snowball into a ton of other higher spells. The X pump spells are so amazing as well. Even if you cast them without spending any additional mana in X, each one you chain into just makes Vadrik that much stronger for just playing the red cost of the spell. Crazy. As I mentioned earlier, you can potentially draw into a ton of cards with this deck thanks to Vadrik. Naturally, the decks running Pull from Tomorrow, Diviner's Portent, Blue Sun Zenith, Commander's Insight, Stroke of Genius, and Drown in Dreams. Their inclusion here is pretty obvious. However, out of the Pay X, Draw X spells possible for a Vadrik deck, these are the ones I settled for when brewing for the simple fact that they're instant speed. Thanks to the recent releases this year, we've gotten way more instant speed Pay X, Draw X spells, so the deck is set with these. As I mentioned earlier, it's possible to chain into more of these if you're also pumping Vadrik with other spells you're drawing into. Just be careful you don't deck yourself. Seagate Restoration and Finale of Revelation are included for good measure. Finale of Revelation will also shuffle your graveyard back into your library, so you'll be able to once again draw into the cards you've played earlier, as well as any card your opponents have dealt with. At least if X is 10 or more, which is Child's Play to Vadrik. Seagate Restoration is only explosive if you already have a fat hand, so it might seem win more since you'd need to already have a ton of cards in your hand in order to draw a ton of cards. However, its backside is a land that has the potential to enter the battlefield untapped for 3 life, so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. And most important of all, these 2 spells grant us no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So the only thing that can take that effect away from us after they resolve is Karn Liberated Ultimating. In any case, Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are also included just in case, especially since, like Seagate Restoration, Reliquary Tower does not take up a slot in the deck, and Thought Vessel is a 2-costed mana rock which the deck needs of anyways. Apex of Power is also included for card advantage, however you're not drawing the cards, you're impulsive drawing them. Impulsive drawing 7 cards for 3 red mana might seem like a waste of Vadrik's ability, especially considering that for 3 blue mana we can draw X cards when casting any of the previously mentioned Pay X, Draw X spells. But if you read the last line of the spell, if you cast it from your hand and you add 10 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So you're actually spending 3 red mana to impulsive draw 7 cards and you get 10 mana of any one color. I suggest going for red mana. Even though the deck is almost 50-50 between red and blue, all the deck's game-ending spells and effects are red. In any case, since you use reds to cast a spell, you probably have blue mana sources open to cast any blue spells you exile this way anyways. And if you exile any colorless spells, then it doesn't really matter. But if you're able to end the game, you'll be able to if you exile those cards and choose red. And which cards am I talking about? Well, we already saw the red pump spells in the deck that make Vadrik a 1-turn clock. However, just as the deck takes advantage of his ability for drawing X cards, it's going to do the same for dealing X damage. Chandra's Ignition, Comet Storm, Crackle with Power, Jaya's Immolating Inferno, and Fanning the Flames have the potential of straight up ending the game. Starting with Chandra's Ignition, even if you don't take off the table with a large enough Vadrik, chances are that they're going to at least clear the board of all other creatures and then finish someone off. If Vadrik does have enough power, then it's immediately game over when you cast it. Comet Storm, Crackle with Power, and Jaya's Immolating Inferno can each hit all of your opponents. Although you need to multi-kick Comet Storm twice to hit 3 opponents, multi-kicker is an additional cost, which is then reduced with Vadrik's ability. So if you consider Comet Storm as casting X generic, 2 generic, and 2 red each time you use it to make the most of it. It's also an instant, so there's that to consider too. If Vadrik is strong enough, resolving any of these spells is enough to kill the table, since the other 2 spells are guaranteed to hit all opponents because of how they work. Lastly, Fanning the Flames requires a bit more work since you have to pay the buyback to get it back into your hand. However, as with Comet Storm, buyback is an additional cost, so Vadrik reduces it from the spell. Just imagine that it costs X generic, 3 generic, and 2 red each time you use it to make the most of it. Since it does return to your hand, you're going to need 2 more red mana each time you cast it. So you might be able to take out the entire table in a single turn, but you can definitely do so in your next turn. One final pay X burn X spell worth mentioning is Electro Dominance. This spell is just crazy good. Not only does it have the potential of taking out a player, but it can also take out any problematic creature, as can the previously spells do as well. However, while this one can't win you the game on the spot like the others have the potential to, it can essentially free cast any other spell in your hand. Remember Eldrazi Conscription? This helps you cast it for free and at instant speed no less. These pay X deal X damage spells aren't the only way to spread the burn around either. Ketis Emberclaw Familiar is included to help Vadrik spread the love. Thanks to Ketis, you only have to hit one opponent with a beefed up Vadrik in order to have Ketis burn everyone else for that same amount of damage. This damage adds up quick, especially if that first opponent gets knocked out, because then Vadrik knocks out the next victim and potentially Ketis knocks out the third one. If not, then it won't take much to end them with any of the previously mentioned burn spells. And if that won't cut it, Metallurgic Summonings and Shark Typhoon make absolutely huge beaters for free. All you have to do is cast your epic spells, which you're doing anyways. Oh, did you just cast a Stroke of Genius for X equals 20? Congrats, you just got a 23/23 Flying Shark thanks to Sharknado. While the huge beaters created by Metallurgic Summonings are grounded, the enchantment itself is amazing. You can pay 5 and exile it to return all instants and sorceries from your graveyard to your hand. This ability is absolutely insane here. Even the drawback is nothing for this deck since it requires you control at least 6 artifacts, which is almost guaranteed here. And even if for some reason you can't finish everyone off in the same turn, Time Stretch gives you the opportunity to do so in your next turn by giving you that turn right after your previous one. While extra turn spells can be obnoxious, this one's used mostly to guarantee your victory. If you take out an opponent now, cast Time Stretch and then take out another opponent each extra turn, so it wasn't that obnoxious, because you are ending the game. Turns aren't even the only thing being copied here either. Copying game-ending spells with cards like Reiterate and Bonus Round can really help you push them to the point of victory. Bonus Round is just crazy good because Vadrik makes it cost only double red even at its base power. Then every instant and sorcery you cast afterwards gets doubled. Insane. You do have to do a bit more effort with Reiterate since you have to do the buyback to use it. However, as I mentioned earlier, Vadrik will more often than not cover that 3 for the buyback along with the single generic in its cost. So you just have to pay 2 red mana each time to copy any instant or sorcery spell you cast, which is ridiculously busted here. Primal Amulet also reduces the cost of instants and sorceries we cast, albeit by 1 generic mana. However, after casting 4 instants and or sorceries, it transforms into Primal Wellspring, a land that copies any instant or sorcery spell we used its mana cost to cast. With 35% of the deck triggering the amulet, this will transform in no time. We can also just reuse our instants and sorceries with Mystic Sanctuary. If it enters untapped, we can top deck any instant or sorcery from our graveyard. Since it's an island, we can fetch for it with 4 out of the 8 fetch lands in the deck, so we can also potentially do so at instant speed in response to drawing a card if we need to be extra sneaky like that. We can also cast Past and Flames to give flashback to all of our instants and sorceries in our graveyard. It also has flashback itself, so we can always reuse it later when we get more spells in there for it. You can also run Lear, Disciple of the Drowned in your deck if you want to always have access to all of your instants and sorceries in your graveyard. He also makes all spells uncounterable. However, that's one reason why I'm not running him in my own build. This has the potential of helping out combo decks which have the potential of outracing us, since combo decks win on the spot more often than this deck will. So I will be able to counter any spells that will either end the game in an opponent's favor or any of their own spells that will prevent me from winning. So even though the deck is only running 2 counter spells, which are Fierce Guardianship and Mindswipe, I want to be able to counter things like an Overloaded Vandal Blast, Psychonic Rift, Ad Nauseam, etc. Since there's only 2 counter spells, it might be tempting to just run Lear and another extra turn spell in their place, but playtesting the deck, I found that if we go too deep into focusing on our own victory, we indirectly enable other players to win. I'd rather avoid that. If I lose, I don't want it to be because I facilitated the loss against me. That being said, these 2 are great because the first one is free and the second one has the potential of dealing a ton of damage as well. Opponents are more often than not going to be completely unable to pay X, so for just 2 mana you countered a spell and dealt X damage to its controller. Scour from Existence and Introduction to Annihilation also become free responses thanks to Vadrik. Exiling any permanent at instant speed for free is no joke. The lesson is at sorcery speed and has the opponent draw a card, but that's a feasible price to pay to exile any non-land permanent that prevents us from winning. Shatter Skull Smashing is another X-burn spell, but it can only hit creatures and no more than 2 at that, which is why I'm discussing it here in the interaction section instead of the end game section of the deck tech. That being said, it'll only cost double red to cast and it could potentially take out 2 creatures no problem. Best of all, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck because its backside is a land with the potential of entering the battlefield untapped at the cost of 3 life. Curse of the Swine and Blasphemous Act can get rid of all creatures. If Vadrik is also getting his toughness pumped, then he'll at least survive Blasphemous Act. Even if he doesn't, he only costs 3 mana, so he can get him back no problem later on. Curse of the Swine is great because we choose which creatures to exile. Best of all, it'll probably only cost us 2 blue mana to exile all of our opponent's creatures, replacing them with 2/2 boars. Vandal Blast, Cyclonic Rift, and All This Does together can deal with everything else. With the first 2, you declare that you're overloading them, which is an alternate cost. However, Vadrik will reduce that cost as well, so you're basically overloading either of these spells for just 1 mana each. All This Does will also force us to sacrifice Vadrik, but if the board needs wiping, it needs wiping. So what better way than to do it for free? This deck only has 4 colored permanents, so All This Does is so good here, especially if cast after Brass's Bounty. This is more often than not only going to cost us 1 red mana to cast. Even if we only had 5 to 6 lands on the battlefield, getting 6 treasures for just 1 red is just too good to pass up. Keep in mind that we can also ramp hard with Sword of the Animus and Sword of Hearth and Home, so this can get us even more treasures in case we need that extra push. However, we can't just rely on the mana acceleration of 2 equipment reliant on attacking with the equipped creature and a single ritual, especially in a non-green deck. That's why the deck is also running Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Arcane Signet, Izzet Signet, Talisman of Creativity, Felwar Stone, and Mox Opal. Mana rocks that need no further explanation than this is how non-green decks need to accelerate its mana. Granted, we can also include a ton of rituals in the deck since they're going to be much cheaper thanks to Vadrik, but I'd rather have more permanent and reusable sources of mana acceleration than one-time brief explosions, especially when Vadrik's already reducing the generic cost of our instants and sorceries. Terrain Generator is the final piece of mana acceleration in the deck and is actually more useful than you'd believe. If we're drawing into a ton of cards, we're likely never missing our land drops anytime soon, so what better way than to drop a basic land at the beginning of the end step before our turn? If we kept mana open for responses and didn't need to use it, then we can just get another land onto the battlefield instead, especially since the deck is running 6 of each basic land, and Terrain Generator, a land itself that also generates mana, doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Speaking of lands, the rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running Volcanic Island, Steam Vents, Volatile Fjord, Training Center, Sulphur Falls, Shivan Reef, Cascade Bluffs, Command Tower, Reflecting Pool, and Ancient Tomb, as well as the 8 fetch lands and 6 of each basic land previously mentioned. As with all of my deck techs, you don't need Volcanic Island, Ancient Tomb, Mana Crypt, Mana Vox, Mox Opal, or the more expensive fetch lands, etc. to make the deck work. You can very easily swap them out for other budget substitutes and the deck will still work just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Vadrik Astral Archmage. This deck is so much fun to play. You're seemingly doing 2 very different things, but they overlap and synergize with each other so well. Not only are you pumping your commander to basically free cast a ton of epic spells, but you're also doing so to swing in and potentially knock out players left and right. I love how Vadrik isn't just another blue-red legendary creature. The moment he got spoiled, I immediately got inspired to brew this deck, and it came out much better than I expected. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all of my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Darren Curtis, and happy brewing.